Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Preservation Resource Center's live class for today. Thank you guys all for being here. I would like to just take a couple minutes to sort of take care of some business. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank all of our members who are here today. I see a lot of you in the audience. And please know your membership means the world to us. Thank you so much for being a member of the PRC. If you are not yet a member, please consider joining. We are a membership-based organization, and we would love to have you. And member dollars do sustain us, and that is part of how we are able to bring you this free online programming during this time. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsor. Stephen Richard Parnes is an amazing supporter of the PRC and has chosen to support us through this difficult time by sponsoring these live online classes. So thank you, Stephen. Thank you for making this possible for everyone who's here today. We have, as you can see, some merchandise available. So if you are interested, please visit prcno.org to do some shopping. We've got a new line of t-shirts out. We have an amazing coffee table book. We have also a wide array of historic preservation related books available for purchase. So please do support us. We have some upcoming events that should be really interesting for everyone. We have an exclusive event for members that will be a virtual tour of the World Trade Center coming up next week. So members, look for that in your inbox. You'll get some more information about that virtual tour that'll be held on the 21st. And again, it's only available for members. So if you want to see inside the World Trade Center Four Seasons project with the PRC, please do join. More information will be coming. A little order of bookkeeping. For those of you that are joining us now in the Zoom platform, you're correct that you do not have video and your mic is muted, but we still want to hear from you. So if you have any questions for our presenter today, as the presentation goes on, you have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to log your questions in there. And once we are finished, we'll try to take a couple of questions toward the end of the class. For those of you who have been tuning in regularly, this is actually a special long edition of our online class today. We'll be with our presenter, Robert Cangelosi, for 90 minutes today for part one in a two-part series on the urban history of New Orleans. This is going to be an incredibly informative and educational class with Robbie. Robbie is the president of Koch and Wilson Architects. That firm was established in 1916, and they specialize in historic preservation in the Gulf South. They've done restorations on the Cabildo, the Herman Grima House, San Francisco Plantation, St. Mary's Assumption Church, the Beauregard Kai's House, Christ Church Cathedral. Robbie's an incredible wealth of knowledge. He has served on the PRC board. He has been editor of Preservation in Print. He is also on the Architectural Review Committee for the HDLC and the CBD HDLC. He's an adjunct professor at Tulane University, a graduate of LSU and the University of Florida. He's an incredible expert on historic New Orleans and historic architecture. We're so lucky and grateful to have him here today to present. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Robbie for him to take over. Hold on one second. I need to unshare this screen. All right. Robbie, we're ready for you anytime.
Thank you very much. Let me pull my screen on up here now. I'm glad so many people could attend today's presentation. When the World Bank met in New Orleans a number of years ago, they asked me to go to Washington, D.C. and present a history of the city of New Orleans. And that's how this lecture first began. Since then, I've added to it. It's grown. I use this as an orientation lecture for the docents and volunteers and tour guides for the Louisiana State Museum as the overview. So I hope you enjoy it. This isn't a religious course, but I want to start off with Epiphany, 12th night, which starts off our carnival season. Many people think they know about Epiphany, like a lot of people think they know about the history of New Orleans, but there's a lot of misconceptions and misbeliefs out there. internet connection is unstable. Can y'all see me? It's saying I'm getting an unstable connection.
Robbie, we can't see you, but we can see your screen. Your audio has gotten a little bit jarbled a couple of times, but it seems to have ironed itself out. If it becomes an issue and we really can't hear what you're saying, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you. Epiphany only appears in one of the four Gospels, and I always like asking, how many kings visited the Christ child? Generally, people always say 3. Well, we don't know. First of all, they were magi. They weren't kings. They were members of the priestly caste of ancient Persia. And we don't know how many magi they were because the gospel doesn't say. It just says that magi, plural, came. Tradition says 3, but we don't know. Where did they find the child? Well, everybody assumes they found the child in a manger. No, according to this gospel, it says they found him in a house, not in a manger. Where were the magi from? We don't have a clue. The gospel just says the east. Now, tradition says Arabia, Persia, and India, but we really don't know. We have assigned names to the magi, but once again, we simply don't know. They're not mentioned. Tradition says, gives them these 3 names up in here, but we really don't know. And what did Joseph do while all this was going on? Well, the poor man's not even mentioned in the gospel. We have no clue what Joseph was doing at this particular time. And here is actually the quote from the gospel where it just says, Magi from the east, the Magi, and on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. Well, all this is going to get us to some of these myths of New Orleans. Jean Lafitte's blacksmith shop was on Bourbon Street, corner St. Philip Street. Well, we don't know that. All of the research says his blacksmith shop was on the Mississippi River. We know he had a mistress at that intersection, but not with the building we always call the blacksmith shop. The Pentalbas are America's first apartment buildings. No, they were built as row houses. They weren't cut up into apartments until the WPA chopped them on up. St. Louis Cathedral is the oldest cathedral in the United States. Once again, this is more misinformation. The current cathedral is not built until 1851. There may be some footings from the earlier cathedral, but even the Spanish cathedral, if we go back to the 1794 cathedral, that still wouldn't be the oldest cathedral in the United States. Exchange Alley was home to the city's fencing masters. Actually, there were more attorneys on that alley than there were fencing masters. I could only find 1 or 2 in working on the French Quarter book. The Cabildo was the seat of the colonial government. No, it was the government for the city of New Orleans. The presbytery was home to the cathedral clergy. During the French period, it was, but that building was torn down and the current presbytery never served that function. New Orleans burned down because Pierre Antoine refused to ring the church bells because it was Good Friday. This poor priest has gotten a bad rap all these years, and there is no evidence that this was the case. Apparently, Grace King found a magazine, a Tulane, from the period that says that this French writer says he heard this story, but he didn't believe it was true at all, but she put it as fact, and it's been around for the longest there. The Casket Girls came to New Orleans and were cared for by the Ursuline nuns. The Casket Girls actually went to Mobile, Alabama, and were taken care of by the Gray nuns. It was a Jesuit priest that made up the story. The custom house is built on bales of cotton. No, we know exactly how the building is built. It's barge boards, then brick, then granite. Camelbacks are the result of a property tax on the number of stories at the street face. Only once in the city's history was there ever a tax on an architectural feature, and that was on the number of chimneys, as we will see in a little bit, and it was extremely short-lived. Closets were not used because they were taxed as an additional room. Once again, more moonlight and manure, as I call it. Closets were actually included in buildings, such as the Gallier House and the Pentalba buildings. Louisiana uses the Napoleonic Code. We use a civil code. The Napoleonic Code didn't come into existence until after our code, and our code is considerably longer than the Napoleonic Code, using Spanish and American laws merged with the original Napoleonic Code. There's a lot of French and Spanish colonial architecture in New Orleans. We only have one French colonial building, the Old Ursuline Convent, and we only have 33 buildings dating to the Spanish colonial period. There's a whole lot of Spanish wrought iron in the Vieux Carré. The majority of the ironwork you see in the French Quarter today is cast iron, either imported in from Great Britain or from the eastern seaboard. We have very little surviving Spanish wrought iron. There are whistle walks, crossing Bible doors, and petticoat mirrors. None of these items exist. They were made up basically to entertain tourists coming into the city. Louisiana Purchase was signed at the Cabildo. I even heard one guide saying, Napoleon stayed at the Presbytere and Jefferson stayed at the Cabildo, and they signed the document at the Cabildo. The Louisiana Purchase took place in France. What happened at the Cabildo was the actual transfer of power, but the actual document took place in France, and neither Napoleon nor Jefferson signed that document. New Orleans had the first opera in the United States. We had early opera, but not the first. There's a lot more documented cases of opera being performed in the United States. Now, whatever you want to call our city, be it the Big Easy, the Crescent City, the city that care forgot, America's winter capital, the Paris of the Americas, Sin City, the Queen of the South, Superdome City, or Superdome City rather, Nolans, or simply New Orleans, you got to admit, our city's got a character all its own. It's really a gumbo of cultures which blend to form this very distinctive American city. Way back in 1819, a British visitor wrote, "To all men whose desire only is to be rich and live a short but merry life, I have no hesitation in recommending New Orleans." Now, geographically, and this is the marker in Lafayette Square, New Orleans is located at latitude 29 degrees 57 minutes, which is the same as Cairo, Egypt, Delhi, India, and Shanghai, China. Longitudinally, we're 90 degrees 8 minutes, which is due south of Chicago and Memphis, and due north of San Salvador, El Salvador, and the Galapagos Islands in the Pacific Ocean. Now, if you're from New Orleans, you know you really need to throw your compass away. Generally speaking, Lake Pontchartrain is north and the Mississippi River is south. However, we don't use those north, south, east, and west directions here in New Orleans, but rather uptown, downtown, Riverside, and Lakeside. In fact, at Jackson Square, the Mississippi River is flowing north, and the sun rises over the West Bank at that location. New Orleans street names marked north and south actually run more east and west, and geographically, it should be impossible for South Claiborne and South Carrollton to intersect at a right angle. And where else in the country would you name a street alongside the levee Leak? But we do it here in New Orleans. Now, the last census, and we're currently undergoing a new census, was in 2010. According to that census, we had 343,829 people living in the city of New Orleans. 59% were African Americans, 33% were white, 5% Hispanic, and 3% Asian. Now, it's estimated that there are about 424,000 people in the city today, but soon we will know what that actual number is. Now, we're a very poor city. 23% of the local households live below the national poverty level, and 25% of the local residents over the age of 25 do not have a high school degree. The median household income is $37,000. The average sale price of a house in New Orleans for 2020 is $250,500. Our climate is very subtropical. We have an average temperature of 70 degrees and an average annual rainfall of 60 inches. That's 5 feet of rain. The lowest recorded temperature in New Orleans was 7 degrees back in 1899, and the highest was 102 in 1980. And yes, if you're from New Orleans, you do know that it occasionally snows here. Now, size-wise, New Orleans incorporates 363.5 square miles. However, only 50% of that is dry land. We've got water everywhere. The very reason for our existence is the Mississippi River, which the French initially called the St. Louis River. The French wanted to control commerce on the river between Canada and the Caribbean. The Mississippi River is the third largest river system in the world, and here in New Orleans, the Mississippi River is 2,200 feet at its widest. It's 196 feet at its deepest, and on a typical day, not at high stage like it is right now, it moves an average of 300 billion gallons of water past Jackson Square every day. Now, the Mississippi River is one of the chief sources of commerce. New Orleans has one of the largest ports in the world with 22 miles of port facilities. Now, besides the river, New Orleans is surrounded by many other bodies of water. We are, in fact, an island. Thomas Jefferson only wanted to purchase the Isle of Orleans, but wound up with the whole Louisiana territory. We are surrounded by Lakes Bourne, Salvador, Desamon, Maurepas, Catherine, and Lake Pontchartrain. Lake Pontchartrain is a brackish mixture of fresh and salt water. It's one of the largest lakes in the United States, covering 622 square miles. It's 40 miles long by 25 miles wide and ranges in depth from only 4 to 16 feet. We are also surrounded by bayous St. John, Bienville, Sauvage, and the remnants of Bayou Metairie. We are surrounded by swamps, marshes, and man-made canals. Now, if all this liquid moisture weren't enough, we also have very high relative humidity here in New Orleans. Our average humidity is 76%, and we have an average of a full month of heavy fog days annually in the city of New Orleans. Now, being surrounded by so much water can present major problems, especially when the city averages 6 feet below sea level, and the Mississippi River is commonly flowing 10 to 15 feet above sea level. New Orleans is like a big soup bowl, high at the edges and low in the middle. The city is protected from the river and lakes by an extensive series of levees, flood walls, and floodgates constructed to a height of 25 feet above sea level. And when, of course, the river threatens to top the levees, spillways above New Orleans, as we recently did, are open to divert water into other Gulf outlets. But all of this protection system traps all the rain that falls into the city. So then when you add the occasional hurricane on top of that, the levee systems are often topped. Consequently, we have one of the world's largest drainage systems. We have 1,500 miles of pipes, 180 miles of canals, that's more than Venice, Italy has, and 22 pumping stations that's supposed to be able to handle 1 inch of rain for the first hour and a half an inch of rain thereafter. We're learning that that's not actually the case by recent news stories and so forth, but that is what the system is supposed to do. A single station can handle supposed to be able to handle up to 25 billion gallons of water a day. And that often proves to be inadequate when the city floods, such as on May 8th, 1995, when we had 20 inches of rainfall in 4 hours. Now, here in New Orleans, we're known for our historic architecture. We celebrate and protect our historic neighborhoods. The Vieux-Carré has some of the oldest legislation in the nation for the protection of this historic area. Our historic neighborhoods developed as individual cities or suburbs or faubourgs, as we call them here in New Orleans, which means false city. From parish line to parish line, we have buildings and neighborhoods listed on the National Register of Historic Places. New Orleans has 14 local historic districts with design controls and 4 more districts in the process of being created. The first of our historic neighborhoods, the Vieux-Carré or French Quarter, was the original walled city. The majority of the surviving architecture in this neighborhood dates to the 1830s and consists of townhouses, Creole cottages, shotguns, and row houses. Upriver from the French Quarter is Faubourg Saint Mary. This was established in 1788 as the city's first suburb. It is today's central business district with 4 separate city-designated historic districts and 2 National Register districts. On the lake side of the French Quarter is Treme. This is one of the oldest neighborhoods in New Orleans. It was first subdivided in 1798 and is today known for its numerous Creole cottages. Downriver from the Vieux Carré is Esplanade Ridge, developed on a natural ridge of land 2 feet above sea level, probably from a crevasse in the Mississippi River. Esplanade Avenue was the major thoroughfare for the Creole population in the city of New Orleans and is the Creole counterpart to the Anglo-St. Charles Avenue. Farther downriver from the French Quarter is Faubourg Marigny, subdivided in 1805 from the plantation of Bernard de Marigny. This neighborhood features many Creole cottages developed by free people of color, such as this example here. Bywater was historically called Faubourg Washington. This neighborhood today goes by the name of the old telephone exchange and is known for its numerous shotguns. The farthest downriver historic neighborhood is the Holy Cross neighborhood below the Industrial Canal. It takes its name from this Catholic high school, which fronted the Mississippi River, which post-Katrina has relocated to Gentilly. It has many shotguns and these wonderful, interesting steamboat houses. Upriver from the French Quarter in Faubourg St. Mary is the Lower Garden District, subdivided according to an 1807 plan for Faubourg Annunciation. This neighborhood features Coliseum Place, an irregular shaped park, and many 19th century galleried homes. The Garden District takes its name from the extensive lawns and lush gardens surrounding houses set on large lots. The neighborhood was incorporated as the city of Lafayette in 1833 and was annexed by New Orleans in 1852. It is known for its suburban villas in the Greek Revival and Italianate styles. The Irish Channel was named for its large 19th century population of Irish. This neighborhood features many carriages and shotguns. Like the Lower Garden District, it was once part of this, like the Garden District, it was once part of the city of Lafayette. Central City was historically referred to as back of town. During the 19th century and early 20th century, it included an Orthodox Jewish community. Uptown developed as a series of faubourgs, some of which were incorporated in 1850 as Jefferson City. Most of the housing stock in this neighborhood dates from the late 19th and early 20th century and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places as the largest district in the country. Carrollton was a separate city prior to its annexation by New Orleans in 1874. It was subdivided in 1832 from the McCarthy Plantation and is named in honor of General Carroll of Tennessee, who encamped here during the War of 1812. And I have written the book recently for the Friends of the Cabildo, which is at LSU Press right now, scheduled to be released at the end of the year on the architecture and the history of this particular neighborhood. Here's, of course, the old courthouse and some of the buildings in Carrollton. Now, jumping across the river is Algiers Point. Much of its housing stock dates to after an 1895 fire, which destroyed over 200 houses in this neighborhood. Mid-City is located in the heart of the city of New Orleans. This neighborhood straddles Canal Street. Its ownership was in dispute for many years and was finally settled by an 1854 court action. Because of its low elevation, development really did not begin until after the city's drainage system was perfected in 1896. Gentilly, this is more of Mid-City. Gentilly was developed as a streetcar suburb during the early 20th century and is known for its early 20th century bungalows. Lakeview was another streetcar suburb begun in 1904. However, much of the area did not develop until between the 2 world wars. Lake Vista was developed in 1939 in a garden city concept, with all of the houses facing parks and cars coming into the rear of the house. In 1955, Pontchartrain Park opened in the Gentilly for middle-class African Americans. Of course, there are many other historic neighborhoods in New Orleans, and when I do my class on how to research your houses, I break down a lot more of the neighborhoods in town. Now, Europeans have been aware of the Mississippi River since the early 1500s, but no attempt had been made to colonize the area. The Spanish had discovered the mouth of the Mississippi River in 1519. However, it would be left to the French to first settle the Mississippi Valley. La Salle claimed the Mississippi River and all of Louisiana Territory for France in 1682, and on his descent down the Mississippi River, he passed the future site of New Orleans. French-Canadian Iberville visited the site of New Orleans in 1699 and traveled the Indian portage between the river and Bayou St. John, now known as Grand Route St. John. After initial fighting with the Native Americans, the French established a lasting relationship with the local Native Americans. After encounter with the British on the Mississippi River at English Turn, it's what we still call the neighborhood today, the French hastily built a cypress log fort on the river in what would become present-day New Orleans, and here's that fortification right here. So they do this in 1700, but 7 years later, they abandon that construction in what would become the city of New Orleans on the West Bank. Now, during the subsequent 2 decades, France established settlements all along the Gulf of Mexico, at Biloxi, Mobile, in Ocean Springs, which at the time was part of the Louisiana Territory. As early as 1708, French-Canadian settlers were given land grants along Bayou St. John and soon began to live there before the city of New Orleans was established. In 1712, unhappy with the very slow growth of the colony, France gave Antonio Crozat a 15-year charter to operate Louisiana. Crozat was interested in locating gold and silver mines, as the Spanish had done in the New World. There will be gold and silver in the Louisiana Territory, in Colorado and the Dakotas, but they won't have discovered that yet. Now, the history of the city of New Orleans proper is going to begin on the site of the French Quarter. Development of the city is attributed to a very controversial figure seen here by the name of John Law. This Scotsman is often credited with the invention of inflation and deficit spending. He was forced to flee Great Britain following a duel over a woman. He then goes to Holland, where he learns about banking based on credit and insider information. Apparently, he was sleeping with all the bankers' wives, and this is where he was getting all the information from, so he's forced out of Holland. Law then goes to France, where he befriends Philippe, the Duke of Orleans, the regent of France. The monarch is a minor and can't rule, so his uncle is doing it for him. Now, with the Duke of Orleans' help, he's going to establish a national bank for France in 1716, and then is going to organize the Company of the West in 1717 to develop the Louisiana Territory. Now, like Crozat, Law is going to expect to find all this gold and silver in the New World, but he too is going to come up empty-handed. Law instructs Bienville, brother of Iberville, to establish the city on the banks of the Mississippi River to control the commerce in the New World between French Canada and the French Caribbean. He's actually instructed to establish New Orleans further upriver than he actually does, but Bienville will choose the site of the city of New Orleans at this crescent in the Mississippi River at the termination of the old Native American portage that he and his brother had traveled years before. He thought that this spot was halfway between the French settlements at present-day Natchez, Mississippi, and Mobile, Alabama, and was inland enough to be safe from the hurricanes in their tidal surge. Some historians dispute that. They say that the selection was to allow for, the selection was done for defensive reasons, that you could see an attacking army coming from upriver or downriver. Others say that he put the city here because he was given a land grant, which is basically everything from Common Street all the way to the Jefferson Parish land, and he was a land speculator. He expected the city would grow onto his property, and people would have to buy land from him. Now, although Law's scheme resulted in the founding of the city of New Orleans, his expected profits from the Louisiana Territory never did materialize, and panic selling of shares resulted in the Mississippi bubble is in 1720. This political cartoon here from the time frame shows Folly distributing worthless land grants to New Orleans and Louisiana while Satan is up in the clouds bursting the Mississippi bubble. At first, houses in New Orleans were built in a very haphazard manner. In 1721, a formal plan for a fortified city was prepared by Royal Engineer Leblanc de la Tour, and Assistant Engineer Adrien de Pouget was sent to Louisiana to lay out New Orleans. It'll be devastated by a major hurricane that same year. The following year, in 1722, a settler built his house out of alignment with the new plan for the city of New Orleans. After he refused to relocate his new house, de Pouget beat the man until he was blind and imprisoned him, and then nobody else went up against not to follow the new plan of the city, which will eventually become what we know today as the Vieux Carré. At the heart of the town was the Place d'Armes of the military parade ground, with the Catholic Church, the only religion allowed by law, at the head of the square. The lot to the left of the church was reserved for the Corps de Gardes, or the military police force for the city. The lot to the right was for the priest's house, a presbytere. Most of the street names were named for the French royalty. Royal Street for the royal family. Burgundy Street, or Burgundy Street, for the Duke of Burgundy. Bourbon Street is named for the royal family in both France and Spain at this particular time frame, not for the booze, as many people missay there. Conti Street for the Prince of Conti. Philippe, the Duke of Orleans, the region of France, not only had the city named after him, but the widest street in the new city, Orleans Street. Now, much to his chagrin, the parallel streets were named for some of the royal bastards of Louis XIV and his mistress, Madame de Montespan. Toulouse Street is for one of these royal bastards, the Count of Toulouse, and Domaine Street for the Duke of Domaine, another royal bastard. So we have a legitimate heir, a patron saint of the royals, an illegitimate heir, a patron saint, and so forth. And so this John Chase cartoon begins to address some of the street names in the French Quarter. Now, getting people to come to New Orleans was very difficult. John Law is going to flood France, Germany, and Switzerland with posters offering free land, provisions, and transportation to Louisiana. He's going to tell prospective settlers that Louisiana's soil yields 2 crops annually, and you didn't have to put the seeds in the ground. They just popped out of the ground. The Native Americans would provide all the free labor that you need. There was no disease or old age in Louisiana, and we had this great climate here, and that there were gold mines and pearl fisheries everywhere in the colony. 10,000 Germans will be swindled into coming to Louisiana, although only 2,000 actually arrived in 1721, settling upriver from New Orleans, which we now know as the German coast. He's going to unload prisoners from the French prisons in 1721, including prostitutes, sending them over to the city of New Orleans. Beginning in 1719, enslaved Africans were sent to Louisiana, 5,000 in 1721 alone. Soon 1/3 of the population of New Orleans was from Africa. Their legal rights and race relationships were governed by the 1724 Code Noir. However, almost from the inception, New Orleans had a sizable free person of color population, particularly coming from the Caribbean. In 1722, the capital of Louisiana is going to be moved from present-day Biloxi, Mississippi, to New Orleans. A local Catholic priest is going to write that year that there were only about 100 huts and a few wretched governmental buildings here in the city of New Orleans. But he predicted that one day soon, an opulent city would replace the canes and the swamps in the area as New Orleans would grow. The Ursuline nuns arrived in New Orleans in 1727 under contract with John Law's company to run the military hospital, but soon engaged in other activities, opening an orphanage and a girls' school. They operate the oldest girls' school in the nation today, being established in 1727 here in New Orleans. Excuse me. Here in this illustration here, you can see in the lower right, the first convent for the Ursuline nuns, which was built in 1734. And you see on the left side of the screen there, the school opened for boys here in the city of New Orleans in 1725 by the Capuchin priests. That same year, 1725, the Jesuit priests were contracted by the Company of the Indies to administer to the Native Americans. They were given the land which would become the central business district after it was taken away from Bienville. The Jesuits would be expelled from Louisiana in 1763 by Pope Clement XIV and the monarchy. The Jesuits are pretty much expelled worldwide in their efforts. In 1729, the Natchez Indians revolted and massacred French settlers at Fort Rosalie, which is present-day Natchez, Mississippi. Here in New Orleans, there was an attempt made to fortify the city, resulting only in a ditch being built around the city. Now, originally, it's planned to be a wall-fortified city, but we'll see the walls come up a little bit later on. The Company of the Indies will be dissolved in 1731, and Louisiana will return to a monarchy, the monarchy as a royal colony. Fortification plans for the city were revived after news hit the city of New Orleans that Quebec had fallen during the French and Indian War to Great Britain. New plans called for a moat and a palisade, which were actually built around the city in 1760, despite the complaints that it hindered access to the Mississippi River. Local architecture during the French colonial period reflects French and French-Canadian traditions, but gradually, the French and French-Canadian traditions were in response to a much colder, snowy climate. Here you see an early building here. Gradually, they'll begin to add galleries to the buildings in response to the local climate. In 1761, Louis XV tried to give Louisiana to Spain, to his cousin, in exchange for a loan in agreement to enter the French and Indian War against Great Britain. His cousin declined. Following France's loss of the French and Indian War, New Orleans and all of Louisiana was transferred to Louis's cousin, King Charles III of Spain, by a secret treaty in 1762. Here in New Orleans, they're not made aware of this until 1764, and it's not until 1766 that Spain attempted to take control of New Orleans. Colonists had prospered under the lax French rule and feared the stern Spanish government and, more importantly, the Spanish Inquisition. Colonists first attempted to persuade the French monarchy to reconsider the transfer, and then expelled Governor Eola in 1769 in a bloodless revolt, the first time that a colony had revolted against a European government. In response, Spain sends the man you see here, Alexander O'Reilly, to New Orleans from Cuba in 1769. He will suppress the rebellion with the execution of the leaders of the revolt and establish the illustrious Cabildo to govern the city, not the colony. The city at this time frame had about 3,200 citizens. O'Reilly will relax Spanish law and allow the British to use the port of New Orleans, helping the city to grow. There is a street in Havana named for O'Reilly. In 1777, during the American Revolution, Governor Galvez allowed American agents to establish supply and ammunition bases here in New Orleans and will lead expeditions against the British settlements at Manchac, Baton Rouge, Natchez, Mobile, and Pensacola, all in support of the Americans. Following the Revolution, Governor Miro encouraged American trade in hopes that those Americans living west of the Alleghenies would favor Spanish domination over America, as it was much easier to travel the Mississippi River to New Orleans than to go by land across the mountains to the Atlantic ports. Soon, the port of New Orleans was filled with flatboats from the Midwest. In 1788, Governor Miro expelled Father Antonio Sedeles, who had been sent to New Orleans as a representative of the Spanish Inquisition. The governor considered this a hindrance to his trying to get Protestant Americans to become part of the Louisiana Territory. Father Antonio Sedelis, seeing what's going on in New Orleans and how much fun we're having here, will come back to New Orleans under the name of Pierre Antoine. He will actually go against a lot of the Catholic doctrine, which he was sent to support and to suppress anyone opposed it. He'll actually become a Mason, which was totally anti-Catholic at the time frame. Now, during the 1780s, Jean Saint Milo, leader of the Maroons, or the runaway slaves, will establish communities in the outlying swamps in what is today New Orleans East at Chef Mentor, which is a French term for big liar because the current goes back and forth. It couldn't make up its mind which way it was going. And in present-day St. Bernard Parish, which was part of Orleans Parish originally. Now, some of the descendants of the Maroons will formally win their freedom for fighting for the Americans during the Battle of New Orleans. In 1782, the city's first public market was established on the site of the present French market. The Acadians, refugees from Nova Scotia following France's loss of Canada during the French and Indian War, begin to arrive in Louisiana in 1785. Also settling in the area at that time were immigrants from the Canary Islands, who we call Isleños, or Islanders, and they settled primarily in what we know as St. Bernard Parish today, but once again was part of Orleans Parish at this time frame. Now, on Good Friday, 1788, and this is where poor Father Pierre Antoine gets his bad rap for. On Good Friday of 1788, 850 of the 1,000 buildings in New Orleans was destroyed by a fire, which were caused by candles on a private altar, set the curtains on fire, and destroyed a large portion of the city of New Orleans. Poor Father Antoine is trying to save the documents. He's throwing them out of the windows. The fire started not too far from the church and the presbytery and all, and none of the official records from the governor or the priest or anybody mentions that this was a real problem, not being able to ring the fire bells because it was Good Friday. Now, the city is going to rebuild very quickly. Wealthy Spaniard, Donnell Monaster, is going to donate funds for a new Catholic church and a priest's home, and is later going to finance the rebuilding of the city hall of the Cabildo. Following the fire, New Orleans is going to grow outside of the French Quarter. This is in 1788 when Faubourg St. Mary, which is today our central business district, will be laid out. The following year, the city's first surviving cemetery, Faubourg St. Louis, will be established. The earlier cemetery was actually inside the French Quarter, and there are buildings on the site of the existing earliest cemetery. Now, between 1791 and 1810, the city's population dramatically increased as people fled the 1791 Santo Domingo, known as Haiti today, slave revolt began to arrive in New Orleans. Then many of these French Creoles, both white and black, are going to come to the city of New Orleans, and they're going to open up many schools here. And in 1792, they're going to open up the city's first theater, the theater of St. Peter Street. One of these refugees, Louis Ducrot, is going to establish Le Moniteur de la Louisiane for these French refugees in 1794. This will be the city's first newspaper. The city's free black population grew dramatically during the Spanish colonial period through the right that slaves had of self-purchase, which could not be denied them. Spanish law, however, did require free women of color to wear long fabric wraps on their hair, on their head, called a tichon. The intention of this law was to make them less desirable to white men, but these very colorful headdresses became so fashionable that women of all races were wearing them here in the city of New Orleans. In 1792, rumors of an American attack on the city of New Orleans spread throughout the city. Governor Carondelet had new fortifications built around the city of New Orleans. He also built the Carondelet Canal from the back of the French Quarter on out to Bayou St. John in 1795 to provide a backdoor into the city of New Orleans by going through the Mississippi Sound into the lakes, down Bayou St. John, down this canal. You could get into the city much easier than fighting the current of the Mississippi River coming up from the Gulf of Mexico. This is basically the route today, as we will see in the next class, of Lafitte Greenway. At the end of the French Quarter end was a large turning basin from which our Basin Street takes its name. Carondelet will grant to the Americans a place of deposit or a free port here in the city of New Orleans, which helped increase the port's trade and also reduce America's desire to take New Orleans by force. The Pope removed the city from the Diocese of Havana, Cuba in 1793 and gave New Orleans its own bishop. During the Spanish colonial period, all citizens had to be Roman Catholic, as it was during the French period. However, we know from the inception we had Jewish settlers, we had Protestant settlers. Even though it was against the law, Spain gave land for the establishment of an Anglican church here in the city of New Orleans. In 1793, during the French Revolution, New Orleanians mobbed the streets crying for their own independence. Governor Carondelet is going to be forced to, the Spanish Governor Carondelet is going to be forced to strengthen the troops here in New Orleans, but is also going to give fleeing French aristocrats a place to settle here in Louisiana. A chimney tax was passed to provide for the city's street lights in 1794. The short-lived tax was the only tax on an architectural element in the city's history, despite numerous claims to the contrary. At the end of the year, on December 8, 1794, New Orleans experienced its second great fire, which destroyed 16 squares, or 212 buildings. It started in a stable by children playing in the hay, catching it on fire. Again, the city is going to rebuild very quickly. New Orleans will have its first building code put into place at the time frame, calling for buildings to be built up against the sidewalk. France had the law, but was generally ignored. You could no longer have wood siding on the buildings. You had to have stucco, and it required these flat tile terrace roofs to be built. Now, this is a real problem because they leaked very badly. The old French roofs, seen in the background here, because of the weight of French tiles on it, they had replaced it with wood shingles, which would catch on fire and spread it very dramatically. Now, 6 months after this 94 fire, Don Almas Nasser is going to write, "You'd be astonished to see how the city is building up." And they predicted that New Orleans would resemble Philadelphia. We're not looking to France or Spain. And here, as we have all these Americans coming into the city, we're being Americanized extremely quickly. In 1795, the Pinckney Treaty, or the Treaty of San Lorenzo, is formally going to give Americans the right of free deposit and travel on the Mississippi River. That same year, Etienne de Boré is going to successfully granulate sugar here in New Orleans. The Jesuits had planted it in the CBD much earlier and were growing it, but de Boré will be the first to successfully granulate it, which makes it become the major cash crop in South Louisiana. In 1796 is the first documented opera performed here in New Orleans. And 2 years later, in 1798, the city's second faubourg was developed, Faubourg Treme, on the north side of the French Quarter. Under Spanish rule, New Orleans transformed into a real city with a population in 1800 of 10,000, including 5,000 whites, 3,000 slaves, and 2,000 free people of color. Although Spain governed, the city remained culturally French. Architectural traditions established by the French continued through the Spanish era. Now, Louisiana is going to be retroceded to France in 1800 through another secret treaty forced by Napoleon. Spain was to receive a kingdom in Tuscany in exchange for Louisiana for the Spanish king's son-in-law. The French, however, did not assume control of Louisiana until Napoleon decided to sell the territory to the United States. There seems to be several factors which helped influence Napoleon's decision to sell. Among them was a threatened war with the United States over control of the Mississippi River, the 1791 slave revolt in Santo Domingo, which was really what France was interested in the New World. That's where the money was coming from, not Louisiana. And Great Britain had blockaded Haiti, and they were worried about losing Louisiana to either the British or the Americans. He needed money for his war, so he's going to dump it on the Americans. So on November 30th, 1803, at the Cabildo, the Louisiana Territory was transferred from Spain back to France, and then on December 20th, from France to the United States. Although Americans had been in the city of New Orleans in large numbers since 1788 through the encouragement of the Spanish government, after the transfer, more and more Americans began to settle in New Orleans, the majority of whom, according to census, coming from the state of New York. That's why some people say we got a Brooklyn accent in New Orleans, because of all these people that settled during this time frame. Now, despite the American influx, New Orleans remained pretty much culturally French. The fact that William C.C. Claiborne, the first American governor, could not speak any French really irked the locals and contributed to a long-lasting friction between the Americans and the Creoles. However, with the Americans came freedom of religion. The Episcopal Church established the first non-Catholic congregation in New Orleans, Christ Church Episcopal, in 1805, followed by the Presbyterians in 1817, the Methodists in 1818. Jewish congregation was established in 1828, Lutherans in 1829, and the Baptists in 1845. The oldest surviving church structure in the city of New Orleans is Our Lady of Guadalupe on Rampart Street, which was built in 1826 as a mortuary chapel for the epidemics in the city of New Orleans. Architectural taste began to change with the arrival of the Americans, who introduced the federal style to the city. Architects who would immigrate to New Orleans included James Dakin, James Gallier, Henry Howard, Benjamin Latrobe, William Brand, and Thomas Wharton. In 1801, Judah Turow came to New Orleans and opened up a small store. His business would prosper and would become an early philanthropist, endowing a Jewish cemetery, a synagogue, an almshouse, an infirmary, and a Unitarian church. Another early philanthropist was John McDonough, seen on the right there, who came to New Orleans in 1804 on a business venture. He would make New Orleans his home and would endow schools in New Orleans and Baltimore, and would will to the two cities what would become City Park. New Orleans eventually buys out Baltimore's interests. Early New Orleans banks included the Bank of Louisiana in 1805, Hamilton's Bank of the United States at the intersection of Royal and Conti Street. In 1808, the St. Philip Theater opened up in the French Quarter, and in 1811, the College of Orleans opened up in Tremé on Governor Nichols Street. The city's fortifications were in pretty bad condition at the time of the Louisiana Purchase, and the city of New Orleans petitioned Congress for their removal. The city's poor took matters into their own hands one very cool night, demolishing much of the palisade for firewood in a winter night. Shortly thereafter, the city claimed the land under the fortifications and requested their complete removal. The American government refused, claiming they purchased this land with the Louisiana Purchase. In 1807, rumors reached New Orleans of an impending attack by the followers of Aaron Burr, and the fortifications, wrong way. Here's Aaron Burr. And the fortifications were ordered rebuilt around the city of New Orleans by Congress. After fear subsided, most of the fortifications were finally removed in 1810, allowing for the establishment of Canal Street, Rampart Street, and Esplanade Avenue. In 1808, unlike the rest of the nation, Louisiana adopted French civil law, mistakenly called the Napoleonic Code, rather than English common law. Under civil law, white women were considered to have the greatest freedom of any women in the nation. They could keep their property separate from their husband. They could lease, rent, and sell that property, all independent of their spouse. the largest free person of color population in the nation developed here in New Orleans under civil law. Free blacks enjoyed full competence in civil and criminal litigation and owned the largest amount of real estate here in the city of New Orleans than in any else in the nation. Free women of color owned about 1/3 of the French Quarter and the adjacent faubourgs of Marigny and Treme. Under civil law, there was forced inheritance, even for illegitimate children. In 1811, there was a slave revolt of approximately 350 slaves upriver from New Orleans, led by Charles Dessalines, a person from Haiti. They burned plantation and sugar mills on their way to New Orleans. The rebellion was brutally suppressed, with slaves being killed and their heads displayed on pikes. In 1812, the steamboat New Orleans arrived in its namesake city. It was the first steamboat to successfully navigate the Mississippi River, accelerating the growth of the city of New Orleans into the nation's leading port. That year, Louisiana became the 18th state in the nation, with New Orleans as its capital. The United States that same year would enter into war with Great Britain. The city that year experienced the aftershocks of a late 1811 earthquake centered in Missouri along the New Badger's Fault. This was the largest earthquake ever to hit the United States, but not too many people living in that part of the country. But here in New Orleans, buildings were damaged as they all shook, and the church bells were all ringing as the churches were swaying back and forth. In 1813, the present French Market was begun along the banks of the Mississippi River, where Native Americans had been trading before Europeans settled the area. Late in 1814, the British began an attack on New Orleans. News that the War of 1812 had ended had not yet reached Louisiana. General Andrew Jackson led a diverse force to defend the city of New Orleans. His decisive victory ensured American control of Louisiana, and following the war, military installations were built to protect the city of New Orleans from further attacks, such as Forts Wrigley and Fort Macomb and Jackson Barracks, all helped to protect the city of New Orleans from any future attack. New Orleans was flourishing economically and culturally under the Americans and entered its golden era. By 1810, New Orleans was the 5th largest city in the nation and the largest in the South, with 24,000 residents. By 1815, the population had grown to 33,000 and increased to 41,000 in 1820. New faubourgs developed up and down the Mississippi River from the original city and back towards Lake Pontchartrain. In 1821, 287 steamboats, 441 flatboats, and 174 barges docked in the port of New Orleans. That same year, a struggling artist from Santo Domingue arrived in New Orleans, John James Audubon, opening a studio on Barrack Street in the French Quarter, and began working on his Birds of America, often finding local birds in the French market. He would live on and off for 9 years in the French Quarter. The following year, in 1822, cabinet maker Francois Signoret opened his shop on Royal Street, producing Empire and Rococo furniture. 10 years later, Prudent Millard opened his Royal Street furniture shop, importing New York-made Rococo furniture as well as Renaissance Revival furniture. The Americans, for the most part, generally live upriver from Canal Street, while the Creoles generally occupied the French Quarter and the downriver Creole faubourgs. The Canal Street's median became known as the neutral ground between these two cultures, and that's where our term neutral ground, still in place today, comes from. This was the DMZ zone, or the neutral territory between these cultures. Canal Street quickly becomes a major commercial district in the city, and it'll have a major impact in the city's economy well into the 20th century. In 1825, the Marquis de Lafayette, hero of the American Revolution, visited 5 days here in the city of New Orleans during his American tour. The Cabildo was renovated as residence, and a very ornate Arc de Triomphe was erected in Jackson Square. At the Cabildo, he was greeted by numerous groups of New Orleanians. Until 1830, the majority of whom, these New Orleanians, spoke only French. 3 years later, a very young Abraham Lincoln arrived in New Orleans working on a flatboat on the Mississippi River. He would return again in 1831. During the late 1830s, the railroad was introduced into New Orleans. In 1831, the Pontchartrain Railroad, affectionately known locally as the Smoky Mary, began running what is today Elysian Fields from the river to the lake. In 1835, the New Orleans and Carrollton Railroad began operation between the cities of New Orleans and Carrollton, spurring the upriver growth of the city of New Orleans. Today, we know this line is the St. Charles Avenue streetcar line and is the nation's oldest continually operating rail line. In 1830, the capital of Louisiana was moved from New Orleans to Donaldsonville, but returned back to New Orleans and remained here until 1849, when the capital was moved to Baton Rouge. The capital during the Civil War was moved to Opelousas and back to New Orleans at the end of the Civil War. In 1879, the capital will be moved permanently to Baton Rouge. During the 1830s, numerous filibustering expeditions were organized here in the city of New Orleans. At first, these were forays to assist Latin Americans, especially Mexicans, Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Hondurans, in winning their independence, and later to try to overturn governments in those countries. One of the most famous filibusters operating out of New Orleans was William Walker. He was successful in taking over Nicaragua and made himself president. His big mistake, he nationalized Cornelius Vanderbilt's property in that country, and after Vanderbilt funded his overthrow, Walker came back to New Orleans, where he was promptly arrested for violation of the U.S. neutrality law. While out on bond, he skipped bond and went back and led another filibustering expedition in Central America. Some say Texas owes its independence to New Orleans, which provided money, supplies, and ammunition and men to the effort. Stephen Austin raised $30,000 here in the city of New Orleans for the Texas Revolution. Zachary Taylor would leave from New Orleans in 1845 in anticipation of the impending Mexican War for Texas. Old Rough and Ready would gain a national reputation from the war and would become the 12th American president. He's the only American president from Louisiana. Dan Rice, a circus clown who would become the prototype for Uncle Sam, supported Zachary Taylor's campaign, and he started the phrase, jumping on the bandwagon, as supporters literally jumped on to a circus bandwagon supporting Taylor. Taylor triumphantly returned to New Orleans in 1847 with much fanfare. The city of Lafayette was created in 1833, upriver from New Orleans, encompassing today's historic neighborhoods of the Lower Garden District, the Irish Channel, and the Garden District. The Citizens Bank of Louisiana was organized in 1833 and was initially located on Toulouse Street. Like most banks of its day, it issued its own currencies. Being in New Orleans, the currency was printed in both French and English. The bank's $10 bills are the origin of the term Dixie. Dix is the term for 10 in French. People were gone to Dixieland, the land of the $10 bills, and that's where the term Dixie originates from this bank. New Orleans Gas, Light, and Banking Company was organized in 1834 in order to provide gas illumination to the city's streets and homes. Gas illumination was first used in the city of New Orleans 10 years earlier at the American Theater. In 1834, the Medical College of Louisiana was established in Faubourg St. Mary. After an endowment from Paul Tulane in 1840, it would later become Tulane University. In 1834, a fire broke out at a two-story residence at the corner of Royal and Governor Nichols Street. Discovered in the Law Laurie home was a scene of horror. 7 slaves were found chained and tortured. The 60-year-old cook, chained to the stove, started the fire. What the fire did not destroy, the citizens did. Bodies were discovered buried in the courtyard. On that site, the present house was built in 1838 for Charles Caffin. All the stories say this is the house where it all took place, but that house is long gone, and we've got all the records at the library to document all that. In 1835, the Louisiana Historical Society was organized and chartered by the state the following year. Louisiana's colonial documents would be placed in their care. In later years, they would publish the Louisiana Historical Quarterly, translating many of the colonial documents and also contained many scholarly articles about Louisiana history. In 1836, the rivalry between the Americans and the Creoles led to a very unusual form of government where New Orleans is divided into 3 municipalities with 1 mayor. The first municipality was the French Quarter. The second municipality was upriver from the French Quarter going to Felicity Street. And the third municipality was downriver from Esplanade. This very bizarre arrangement lasted until 1852, when it was clear that the tripling of municipal efforts, departments, and jobs was inefficient, expensive, and the city was then reunited. By the mid-1830s, cotton was king in Louisiana. Over 1 million bales passed through the port of New Orleans annually. This agricultural base was made possible by enslaved labor. However, here in the city of New Orleans, 1/3 of the African Americans were free people of color. During the 1830s, one of these free people of color, named Robert Cangelosi, invented the vacuum pan method of sugar refining, the single most important invention for the sugar industry, making obsolete the dangerous, wasteful, and dirty open kettle evaporation process. This new process dramatically increased the volume of sugar kegs passing through the port of New Orleans. On January 25th, 1837, the Picayune newspaper began publication and is still in circulation today. In 1838, the New Basin Canal was opened up in the American section of town to rival the Carondelet Canal in the Creole portion of town. Today, this is where the Pontchartrain Expressway runs. The canal was 60 feet wide, 6 feet deep, and 6 miles long. It was constructed by Irish and German immigrants, 8,000 of whom died of disease caught while digging the canal in the swamps. Now, the canal was closed in 1846, and the expressway opened up on its site in 1857. In 1838, the Washington Artillery was established here in the city of New Orleans. These soldiers would fight in all wars, from the Mexican-American War to the Iraq Wars. Finally, in 1838, Henry Hobson Richardson would be born in St. James Parish, Louisiana, and grow up in New Orleans on Julia Row. He'd become the second American to attend the French École des Beaux-Arts School of Architecture, and when he returned to America, would become the nation's leading architect. He designed the Richardson Memorial Library, now part of the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, prior to his death. By 1840, New Orleans was the 4th largest city in the nation. And despite its rapid growth, several factors are coming in to affect the city's future growth. The Erie and the Ohio Canal opened in 1831 and 1832 respectively, I can't get it out, I'm sorry, enabling goods to be routed directly to New York rather than coming down the Mississippi River through New Orleans and then shipped to New York. Additionally, New Orleans, although it had this early system of railroads, didn't hook up to the national rail system, and the mouth of the Mississippi River began to silt up very early. In 1840, Jules Leon, a free man of color, brought the invention of the photograph to New Orleans, making it one of the first cities in the nation to be documented by photograph. Unfortunately, none of his photographs survived. This is a lithograph that we have in our office that Mr. Leon did. So we have this early documentation of the city by photograph. Also in 1840, Antoine's Restaurant opened up in a city which had already an established national reputation for fine cuisine. As early as 1820, the Tremont Hotel on Jackson Square enjoyed a national reputation. In 1840, Louis Gottschalk performed a concert at the St. Charles Hotel. He would compose 300 pieces, which were the forerunners to jazz. He would live in the French Quarter on Esplanade and on Conti Street. Finally, in 1840, it was the 25th anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans, and former President Andrew Jackson, hero of the Battle of New Orleans, returned to the city for the celebration, and he laid the cornerstone for his statue in Jackson Square. The following year, the Boston Club was founded to play the card game of Boston. It's followed by the Pickwick Club in 1857 and the Louisiana Club in 1879. These clubs are closely associated with several of our carnival crews. The upriver area of New Orleans continued to develop. The town of Carrollton was established in 1845, and in 1846, the borough of Freeport was created from several upriver faubourgs. In 1850, 7 upriver faubourgs were incorporated as Jefferson City. Urban improvements during the antebellum period included the construction of the U.S. Mint in 1835, the St. Louis Hotel in the Creole-dominated French Quarter in 1840, and in the CBD in the American sector there, the St. Charles Hotel, also in 1840. This was considered the finest hotel in the nation at the time frame. St. Patrick's Catholic Church was also completed in 1840 as the tallest structure in the city of New Orleans. Construction was begun on the Custom House, and you can see it under construction back here in this very early photograph, in 1848. And in 1849, the Southern Yacht Club was established, making it the second oldest yacht club in the country. It's actually initially established in Pass Christian, but quickly moves on over to New Orleans. Now, the city was flooded in 1849 when the levee at Pierre Sauvet's plantation in River Ridge failed. It took nearly a month for the floodwaters to recede. The following year, in 1850, New Orleans was connected to the rest of the nation by telegraph. Now, during the antebellum period, the Greek Revival and Italianate styles of architecture were introduced here into the city and became very popular. During the 1850s, Jackson Square was renovated, and the Baroness Pontalva constructed the row houses on either side of Jackson Square. St. Louis Cathedral was rebuilt. Here's the Baroness here. Here's the cathedral, and you notice the spire in here. These are photographs that the Pontalva family recently brought into the city of New Orleans. It was originally not enclosed. It was all open air of iron and wood in there. And mansard roofs were added to the cabildo and presbytere, and the statue of Andrew Jackson was placed on the cornerstone that Andy had laid a few years earlier. City Park was begun in 1851 on the land donated by John McDonough. Gallier Hall was completed in 1853 as the city hall for the second municipality and would later serve as the city hall for the reunited city. In 1859, the French Opera House opened up in the French Quarter. In 1851, P.T. Barnum's Swedish Nightingale, Jenny Lind, performed in the city of New Orleans during her American tour. She performed more concerts here in the city of New Orleans than in any other American city except for New York. In 1852, the city of Lafayette was annexed by New Orleans, beginning an upriver expansion, which would continue into 1874 as the city absorbed area after area. Antebellum New Orleans was racked almost annually by plagues of tropical disease. Most epidemics coincide with the influx of immigrants to the city who lacked the resistance to the disease. The worst outbreak was in 1853, a yellow fever epidemic. It's estimated at that time frame that 11,000 people died, or 8% of the city's population. Deaths were so numerous that victims were often buried in massive graves outside the cemetery, and those have been discovered at the foot of Canal Street as well as on Claiborne Avenue. Now, if you translate that to the epidemic we're going through right now, if you take 8% of the city's population, we would have 34,612 deaths in the city of New Orleans due to COVID. But thank God we don't have that money. Horse racing was established in New Orleans very early, and the Fairgrounds Racetrack is the second oldest in the nation. We had very many early racetracks done, established here in the city of New Orleans, but the Fairgrounds Racetrack is going to open up in 1872. During the 1850s, New Orleans was America's leading horse racing center. Now, Mardi Gras had always been celebrated in the city. Carnival balls were held during the French and Spanish colonial period, and the earliest recorded parade that we have is in 1805. The city's oldest surviving carnival organization is the Mystic Crew of Comus, founded in 1857. In 1858, following riots in 7 other American cities, the American Know Nothing Party rioted in New Orleans. They were anti-immigrant, especially anti-Irish and Germans, and they were also anti-Catholic. Pretty hard to do in the city of New Orleans, but they were anti-Catholic. Their army occupied Jackson Square as well as the Cabildo in a standoff through the mayor's election that year. Now, on the eve of the Civil War, over 3,500 steamboats docked in the port of New Orleans annually, and the city was the largest cotton market in the world. We had 168,000 citizens. We were the 6th largest city in the nation and by far the largest in the South. 40% of the city was foreign born, mostly Irish, about 25,000 of whom lived predominantly in the Irish Channel, but also in other neighborhoods such as Marigny and in Carrollton. Of the city's 25,000 African Americans, 14,000 were free people of color. The Irish and the Blacks vied for low-paying, physically demanding jobs in the city. Another very large ethnic group in the city at the time was the Germans, who numbered about 20,000. They lived in Carrollton, Jefferson City, the Lower Garden District, Central City, Bywater, and Marigny. Parts of Bywater and Marigny were actually called Little Saxony due to the large number of Catholics who lived there. But New Orleans has been always very ethnically complex. In Marigny, this church was built for German Catholics. Nearby, French Catholics built this church. This church, not too far away, was built for African Catholics, and this one was built for Irish Catholics. Everybody wants God to speak their own language, so they had all these ethnic churches very close to one another. Now, New Orleans had very strong economic and social ties with the Union. It was dependent on it for half of its agricultural and nearly all of its commercial interests. It was not in the city's interest to secede from the Union. However, after Abraham Lincoln was elected president, New Orleans followed other southern cities and initially became an independent. Louisiana followed other southern cities and became an independent nation, and shortly thereafter joined the Confederacy. The Confederacy's only African American troops, known as the Louisiana Native Guard, was organized here in the city of New Orleans in 1861. These free men of color owned slaves and plantations. The strategic location of New Orleans at the mouth of the Mississippi River made it an early target for Union forces under Admiral Farragut, who easily overran the forts at the mouth of the river in April of 1862. Panic seized New Orleans as supplies were destroyed to prevent them from falling into Union hands. Mobs looted the city. Although the mayor refused to surrender, New Orleans was easily taken, and General Benjamin Franklin Butler was placed in control of the city. Butler was particularly despised here in New Orleans because of his General Order number 28 that stated that any woman showing disrespect to the Union could be treated as a prostitute and a soldier could have his way with them. Local citizens referred to him as Beast Butler and commonly placed his image at the bottom of their chamber pots. Butler was also known as Spoons Butler because it was rumored that everywhere he ate, he stole the silverware. Despite the fact that Butler's regime was filled with corruption, and this is proof thereof, he built this mansion in Lowell, Massachusetts out of money he stole out of New Orleans. He did have some positive impact on the city. He cleaned the markets and the streets. He repaired the levees. He fought crime. He fed the poor here in the city. Now, Abraham Lincoln's 1868 Emancipation Proclamation specifically does not include New Orleans or any other Union-occupied territory or any other territorial states that did not join the Confederacy. Slavery in New Orleans and Louisiana will be in fact abolished by the 1864 Louisiana Constitution. Louisiana will be the first southern state to accept Abraham Lincoln's re-entry plan into the Union, and will serve as the model for other southern states to re-enter the Union. Following the war in 1866, the 9th Cavalry was organized here in New Orleans. This African-American troop became famous as the Buffalo Soldiers and were very influential in the development of the American West, fighting in the Indian Wars, protecting trains and wagon trains, and surveying Western lands. In 1864, Charles Roussin established the New Orleans Tribune, which ran to 1870. This bilingual paper was established for African Americans. It was reincarnated in 1985. In 1865, the Pelican baseball team was organized as an amateur baseball team here in New Orleans, and in 1887 joined the professional Southern League, winning pennants in 1887, 89, and 90. The team would play in numerous venues around the city of New Orleans in various parks, and the team would fold in 1961. Reconstruction, which I got a little time left here, is where we were going to stop today, is the period following the Civil War. It was a time of disorder and political corruption. The Louisiana Lottery was just one of the many corrupt venues during the period. By 1874, the state of Louisiana is bankrupt. Republicans disenfranchised almost all white citizens and enfranchised all African American citizens under the state constitution of 1868, which gave the governor to appoint the New Orleans police force, registrar, and voting return boards. Voter fraud is quite common. Congress and federal troops settle most elections, replacing the Republicans in control. This constitution is going to produce the most successful African-American Republican organization in American history. Everyone from the governor on down will be an African-American Republican. Under the new Constitution, the governor created the Metropolitan Police Force, comprised mostly of African-American men for the parishes of Orleans, Jefferson, and St. Bernard. Resentment over the forced government of the Republicans will result in several bloody race riots. White citizens will seize control of government offices, will be quickly evicted by Union soldiers. Overreaction will result in the formation of the White League in 1874, which will again seize control of state and city offices in the Battle of Liberty Place, in which 31 were killed and 79 wounded. President Grant sends in troops and 3 warships to retake control of New Orleans and Louisiana and disband the White League. In 1876, Francis T. Nichols, the Democrat, won the gubernatorial election. However, the Republican-controlled Election Return Board declares the Republican candidate Stephen Packard the winner. 2 inaugurations take place here in New Orleans, and Louisiana had 2 governors. The Continental Guard, a reincarnation of the disbanded White League, took control of government offices for a 3rd time. In Washington, D.C., the election of Republican Rutherford B. Hayes was also in dispute. Louisiana agreed to cast her electoral college votes for Hayes if he agreed to acknowledge that the Democrat governor candidate, Hayes, was in fact the governor, and that he would agree to remove federal troops from Louisiana, and particularly New Orleans, ending Reconstruction in 1877. Now, during all this political turmoil, Jefferson City and Algiers were annexed to the city of New Orleans in 1870, followed by Carrollton in 1874. Resorts along Lake Pontchartrain began to flourish, such as West End, Spanish Fort, and Muhlenberg. Institutions of higher education for African Americans were established. In 1869, Straight University was established by the Congregationalists. Union Normal, later New Orleans University, was established by the Methodists the same year. The 2 colleges will later merge in 1930 to form Dillard University. Leland was established by the Baptists for African Americans in 1871, and the state will establish Southern University initially here in New Orleans in 1880. Asylums, orphanages, and homes created to assist indigent women and orphans created by the Civil War and the epidemics will pop up during this time frame. Many of these will be run by religious groups, such as the Jewish Widows and Orphan Asylum, the German Protestant Orphan Asylum, St. Anna's Protestant Home, operated by the Episcopals, and Maison de Hospitalière, operated by the Catholics. During Reconstruction, a sizable number of Asians arrived here in New Orleans and helped develop a Chinatown near the present-day, near present-day Main Public Library. The post-Reconstruction years were New Orleans' Gilded Age as the economy begins to rebound during this particular time frame, and some of the more celebrated elements of the city began to develop. Cast iron galleries are really post-Civil War modernizations to older buildings there. The larger homes along St. Charles Avenue in the Queen Anne, Eastlake, and Colonial Revival style will be built. Uptown will expand. Carnival crews will increase during this particular time. Storyville, the city's red light district, and jazz will come into existence. Now, I'm going to stop here and we'll pick up this in a week on the post-Reconstruction era. I know there's a lot that's been thrown out at you. I see 4 questions up in there. Do I click on here and read some of these here? Is it true that Annunciation Square is a real estate boondoggle envisioned as a second Jackson Square with a cathedral, but only a few grand houses were built before it went bust? You can read the history of Annunciation Square in the Friends of the Cabildo, the Lower Garden District. There was to be a church on the square. It was part of the Faubourg Annunciation, it was originally called. Later on, they called the neighborhood not Melpomene, but Melpomania, and there were Melpomanians that lived there. It was developed by the American interest in town, and yes, it did grow. It was to be one of many public spaces. In addition to that, what we now know as Lee Circle was developed at the same time frame, Coliseum Place. There was a quay along Dryad Street, which was also a park there. So it was part of this very classic urban development at the time frame. They were to build a Coliseum, and that's where Coliseum Street takes its name. Britannia Street takes its name from a Britannium school, which was to be built on it. So it's this very 19th century classic development that they're going to do there. And the fact that the bigger houses didn't go there, I don't really have a good explanation for that. Is it true that the French language was outlawed in 1863? Not to my knowledge. Louisiana legal documents continue to be published in both French and English all the way until the 20th century, from what I have read and seen there. For a long period of time, they discouraged people, particularly in Acadiana, from speaking French, the kids and all. And of course, now we are encouraging through Codafil and other things such as that for a maintaining of that language. Which house types were carried over into, which house styles were carried over into the rest of the U.S.? Most of our styles were imported into New Orleans. After we get out of the colonial period, basically everything gets imported into New Orleans. We have all these architects coming in after the Louisiana Purchase. We have the Federal style brought in, the Greek Revival, the Italianate. In my office, even though we say we were established in 1916, the people that established it were working for firms in New Orleans before the Civil War. And we have all their architectural books going back that far here in our office. And these are national architectural pattern books. which they are looking at. When I teach my class at Tulane, I show buildings being built in New Orleans and the precedent from some of these. Even architects like James Gallier are stealing their designs out of it. Ann Masson is working on a book for the Historic New Orleans collection right now in Dupuy, and she is finding Dupuy is stealing designs from books that are being published in Europe. So with no architectural schools at this time frame, you basically copied other people's work, and so you're copying styles that are coming into New Orleans. It's a very complex question there, and it takes me one full semester at Tulane to get through all of that. The name of my book, the upcoming, I have several books on out now. The most recent that I was the history of the crew of Bacchus, but I'm sure you're asking about architectural books. I am chairman of the Friends of the Cabildo architectural series. I did the book on Jefferson City, as well as the university section, the Carrollton book, and this is New Orleans architecture, and there are various volumes of them. They have subtitles to it. The most recent one getting ready to come out the end of the year will be on Carrollton. I am currently working on the French Quarter book right now. Can you recommend some sources to help me learn more about the history of New Orleans? Leonard Hubert, Pictorial History of New Orleans is very good for an overview. It gives you a lot of illustrations, some of which I have stolen for this presentation today. That is a very good source there. There are a lot of sources that go back some period of time, but we're finding that they were relying on myths and legends, a lot of which I'm dispelling in the French Quarter book, some of the stories of the buildings in the quarter that were written in some of these. But Leonard Hubert's A Pictorial History of New Orleans. He also has a pictorial history of Louisiana, which covers a lot of New Orleans. That is sort of a very good sort of overview there of the history. You can get into different periods. I've actually gotten very interested in the mafia in New Orleans lately and working in the French Quarter book. My great-grandfather was on a committee fighting the mafia, and because of that, he got a mafia letter telling him they needed to pay this protection money or they will kill my grandfather. And they mistakenly got the child next door and executed him. And in working in the French Quarter book right now, I'm finding a lot of these stories at the Beauregard Kai's house, which I was on the board of. There was a mafia incident there in 1908, which was well reported in the newspapers. And there are books written about the mafia being established in New Orleans before any other city in the nation. There are books on Reconstruction period. There are different books on different topics there, but a good overview would be Leonard Hubert there. Let's see, I've got off track here. If I answered all the questions here, I don't see, wait, I got to scroll down, I'm sorry.
We actually, so it is 3:30, so we are coming up sort of on the end of this. I don't want to keep everyone. I know that this has been a long session and it's been fantastic. So to anyone that needs to go, thank you for coming. We really appreciate you being here, and we hope to see you at the next installation of Robbie's classes. Next Friday on the 15th is going to be part 2 of this, so he'll take us from where he left us off today up until pretty much present day. I want to one more time just give a shout out to Stephen Richard Parnes, who is our sponsor for today's class and for this series of classes. If anyone out there is interested in sponsoring our online classes or anything else that the PRC does, please reach out to us. You can email me, smohan@prcno.org, and I can connect you with our development team. But if you're interested in supporting us, please, please, please do. Also, one quick plug, we do have an online bookshop. So we don't necessarily have all of the books that Robbie has been recommending, but we do have a number of books available on sale on our website that cover a wide variety of New Orleans history topics. So please do check them out. Buying books from the PRC definitely supports what we do. So consider doing that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Robbie, we do have a couple of other questions that came in through the chat function. So I want to ask you just a couple of things, and then we might need to get going. Someone's asking a question about Jean Lafitte and whether or not he had, they're asking if he had pirate stations throughout Barataria. And if so, is there anything left of their presence there and what would have been? Robbie, are you there?
Forgot to unmute, I'm sorry. Jean Lafitte considered himself a privateer, not a pirate, which was authorized by governments at the time frame. Yes, they did have stations there. He did wind up going to around Galveston. Are there any surviving things in the Barataria? I kind of doubt it. I think they were probably very poorly built and so forth, but I'm not an expert in the Barataria area. Okay, next question. I still have some other questions on the screen if we've got time here, but go ahead and ask the ones on the.
This is a really practical question. Someone's saying that they've been looking for the Friends of Cabildo, a book that seems to be really hard to find. They're specifically looking for the university section edition, but are they ever planning to reissue some of the harder to find editions of that series, or is it sort of you find what you can?
Some of the early versions are a little harder to find. They were done by Pelican, which is no longer in business. They were published in paperback. They do go very quickly at estate sales when they're there. The Friends of the Cabildo, you might go to their website. They have, their shop is still working through all of this, and they do carry a lot of the books there. But yes, some of them are harder to, particularly if you're demanding a hardback copy. But the paperback copies of the first one, which would be the Lower Garden District, I think are pretty much still available in a lot of stores. I've also seen them online at some of the places that sell various books online there.
Great, thank you. I believe, are all of the major questions over there. Someone's asking for another source source material from you. They're interested in a lot of the old maps that you used in the presentation. Can you tell people where they might find some old maps of New Orleans for their own research and fun and just sort of personal interest?
The Regional Planning Commission did a report which on the growth of the metropolitan area that has a lot of historic maps there. A lot of maps are available online. You can just Google historic maps of New Orleans. Historic New Orleans collection has a lot. New Orleans Public Library, Tulane University. There are Sanborn Insurance maps. The Historic New Orleans collection did a book on lithographs, and maps are lithographs, and a lot of them are in that particular book there, so you might find some there. I've accumulated these things. Our office, Richard Koch started collecting them very early, gave a lot of them to actually the Library of Congress and the Historic New Orleans collection and the State Museum. So I've transferred some of the slide copies to digital format here in the office, but there's a lot of sources for those maps. I've got some other questions here on the screen. Is this being recorded so they can go back and catch what they missed? I believe you told me this is being recorded. Is it correct?
It is being recorded, and it can be, once we get it from the system, it'll be up on the on prcno.org, so you can look for the recording there.
Okay, a question about the French. Was the French market only established in 1782? Wasn't there trading happening there with the French presence before that time? Since the general area wasn't, yes, Native Americans were trading on that place prior to the time frame. The 1872 is when they're building actual buildings on the site that we can document going back to. But we do know that Native Americans were trading on the site of the French market very early before Europeans were ever here. Some of the, like when I did the Historic New Orleans collection, we did archaeological investigations. We found Native American habitation on the site prior to European habitation. That's something I do need to add into this presentation, is some of the Native American experiences, although that's more archaeology, and what I'm finding is contradictory quite often, so I need to do a little bit more learning on that. When was the last time the Morganza spillway was open? I really do not know the answer to that question. Italianate, what is its origin? Italianate was a reaction to the Greek Revival style. Greek Revival wanted everything looking like a Greek temple, symmetry, monumentality. Roofs were not to be major design elements. The Italianate did everything else. They're based on the Italian farmhouses of Tuscany, Italy. And it likes, instead of flat-headed openings, segmental-headed openings. Nationally, it prefers towers. We don't get that a whole lot here in New Orleans. It likes grouped windows. It likes more rustification to the exterior. We start to see drop siding being used, things such as that. I think I answered the question about the Carrollton book already, part of the Friends of the Cabildo series. Is it true that 126 plantations on the old Oak Road were owned by Black women and they suddenly disappeared? I'm sorry, I'm not aware of that at all. I don't even know what the old Oak Road is. I apologize, that's just beyond my knowledge. Let's see, any other questions here? I think that's all the questions that are typed in there. Do you have any other questions there?
I think those are all the questions for today. Robbie, lots of people have been writing in saying thank you, and this was a wonderful presentation. Absolutely, I second that. This has been fantastic. I know I learned a ton, and really appreciate you taking the time to do this and educate us all about the history of New Orleans. I'm very much looking forward to next week. So thank you to everyone for being here, and we will see you at the next one.
Bye. Thanks y'all for attending.
Thanks, Robbie. Take care.
Bye.